Welcome. Have you ever had a great idea that just didn't work? We're going to see an example of that today as we explore Exodus chapter 5. We'll just work through verse by verse and we'll get an example of this. So we'll title this A Great Idea That Didn't Work, but we're going to throw a yet on the end. A great idea that didn't work yet. I'm Doug Ford. I'm a pastor at Calvary Chapel, Sweetwater, and join me with a study through Exodus 5. Afterward, Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, let my people go, so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness." Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." I suspect that as Moses approached Pharaoh with Aaron at his side, that the direction the Lord had given him did not have a timeline on it. And I suspect Moses approached with the idea that this was going to be fairly easy. The Lord was on their side. It was difficult for him. He didn't know how to speak. But the Lord kept assuring him. And I get the sense that as Moses approached him, he thought, I'm going to say, let my people go, and we're going to do a couple of things. Pharaoh was going to be impressed, and he's going to let the people go. And I suspect Moses felt like it was going to be pretty short business because the Lord was on his side. But it had to be a process because there were other things working that as we see in our lives, as the Lord works behind the scenes, there's things going on that we can't know about and are not aware as he's growing us. Moses and Aaron go to Pharaoh, say, let my people go. And Pharaoh's first response is, who is this Lord? Who is this Lord that you speak of? Because the Egyptians had like 60, 80 different gods that they worshiped. They had a god or a goddess for practically everything associated with everything that they did in the land and their lives. And so, who is this Lord that you speak of? Because Pharaoh wasn't aware of this Lord. This Lord meant nothing to him. They were very careful about how they dealt with gods. And even Pharaoh himself was viewed as a god or a son of God and a godlike creature. And so even the people of Egypt would have looked at Pharaoh as godlike. And so Pharaoh was not easily impressed with someone claiming that they were going to worship a god. He wanted to know more about this God and why he should be concerned about such a God. And until that happened, until he knew this God and knew the power of this God, he had no respect for him. And he said, I don't know this God, and I won't let Israel go. Verse 3. Then they said, the God of the Hebrews has met with us, and now let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God, or he may strike us with plagues or with the sword. And plagues and the sword being judgment. So let us go and let us offer sacrifices. They had a reason for offering these sacrifices. And should we not offer these sacrifices, that we stand to face judgment. And so Moses gives this explanation of who this God is and why that they needed to go. Verse 4, but the king of Egypt said, Moses and Aaron, why are you taking the people away from their labor? Get back to your work. Then Pharaoh said, look, the people of the land are now numerous, and you are stopping them from work. The Pharaoh said, look, the people of the land are now numerous, and you are stopping them from work. You need to get back to work, Moses. You're taking the people away from their work, and you need to just drop this, let the people get back to work and get back to the important things in Egypt, especially as Pharaoh would have seen them. And he's essentially sort of hinting at Moses, you're just making this stuff up, and that this pretend God that you made up did not mean anything to Pharaoh, and therefore you need to just drop this and let the people get back to work. That same day, Pharaoh gave this order to the slave drivers and the overseers in charge of the people: you are no longer to supply the people with straw for making bricks. Let them go and gather their own straw, but require them to make the same number of bricks as before. And don't reduce the quota. They are lazy, and that is why they are crying out, let us go and sacrifice to our God. And so he's simply saying that Pharaoh's saying they're just lazy. They're looking for a way out of work. They're invented this God so that they could say that they were going to go offer sacrifices to cease working. And if they've got time to make up stories about this God, they got time to make more bricks. Keep the quota the same. They got time for more work. Keep the quota the same, and make them do the extra work of finding their own straw that we won't have it delivered to them. And so it sort of makes life more difficult for them at this request. So from the action of Moses and Aaron go into Pharaoh, Pharaoh draws the conclusion that they're lazy. He increases the amount of work on them, and it makes life more interesting for them. Verse 9, make the work harder for the people so that they keep working and pay no attention to the lies. Obviously implying that Moses and Aaron are lying, that they're trying to draw the people away from the work that they do for Pharaoh. Pharaoh stands between God and his covenant promises people. God is getting ready to show himself holy, mighty, show them what righteousness is, give them the law, and he identified himself as the one who gave the covenant promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Pharaoh stands between God and his people to do this. And so God is simply using the hard-heartedness of Pharaoh to show himself mighty, to show his power and authority. And he brings this to a crescendo, allows it to build, so he shows himself mighty until Pharaoh and all of the people of the land fold up, and the Lord brings his people out of the land. And so this is just part of that sort of building to that crescendo. And Pharaoh initially is like, I don't know this God, I don't know what's going on, but he wants to keep the respect of these people, that they look at him as godlike, they look at him as the authority and the power in their life. And he's saying they need to ignore these lies about this other God, that he is trying to keep the people's eye on him. And isn't that what we go through in our lives all the time, as we see in politics, we see in our jobs, we see in many other places, that people are struggling for that authority and the power over your life, over other people's lives. And it's fascinating that the Lord says that we should seek him first, and his kingdom and his righteousness, and then all these other things fall into their proper place within our life if we put him high and holy and at the center. And so all the way through the Bible, we sort of see that spoken into our lives and the lives of God's people, and in different ways. And so we see that coming about for the Hebrews. Verse 10, then this slave drivers and the overseers went out and said to the people, this is what Pharaoh says, I will not give you any more straw. Go and get your own straw wherever you can find it, but your work will not be reduced at all. And so the people scattered all over Egypt to gather stubble to use for straw. The slave drivers kept pressing them, saying, complete the work required of you for each day, just as when you had straw. And Pharaoh's slave drivers beat the Israelite overseers they had appointed, demanding, why haven't you met your quota of bricks yesterday or today as before? And so the slave drivers were Egyptian slave drivers. and then they gave direction to the overseers. The overseers would have been the Israelites, would have been Hebrews. And so the Hebrews overseers would be kind of like the crew chiefs of groups of these slaves that were making bricks. And so the Egyptian slave drivers are beating the overseers. And if the overseers don't get their own people to produce the quota of bricks, then the overseer is the one that got beat. So the overseer is between the people and the whips of the slave drivers. And so they're taking a beating from one side, and they're trying to get their people to work harder. And if they don't get the quota of bricks, they're the ones that get the beating of it. So they're in a terrible situation where they cannot win. And you can imagine them being in this difficult situation, not to mention the hard work of the Israelites, what they begin to think about Moses and his idea, what they begin to think about Aaron and Moses going in and speaking to the Pharaoh, like, our life just got more difficult. Please don't go back and say anything else. We can't take it. And if they go back in to ask Pharaoh for more, how's that going to end up with us? How's our life going to continue to get worse? And the overseers would say, how much more will I be beaten or be beaten to death? And so you can imagine what was going on in their minds. Verse 15, then the Israelite overseers went and appealed to Pharaoh. Why have you treated your servants this way? Your servants are given no straw, yet we are told, make bricks. Your servants are being beaten, but the fault is with your own people. The overseers, the Hebrew overseers, sort of bypass the slave drivers. They are bypassing the leadership within, with Moses and Aaron. They're going right to the Pharaoh and saying, Pharaoh, why are you treating your servants this way? That we are your servants, that we are working for you, and almost acknowledging, please back off a little bit. You have our allegiance. You have our commitment to continue to work, but you've pressed us to the point where they're breaking. He pressed them to the breaking point where they're working and being beaten this way. And so they're sort of a begging for backing off, but almost a pledge of commitment to the Pharaoh. But Pharaoh said in verse 17, lazy. That's what you are, lazy. And that is why you keep saying, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Of course, they weren't saying that. That was Moses and Aaron. These overseers weren't saying that. Let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Now get to work. You will not be given any straw, yet you must produce the full quota of bricks. And so even Pharaoh, this overseer the overseers seem to be separating themselves from Moses and saying, Pharaoh, we're your servants, and why are you doing this to us? And Pharaoh links him right back to Moses and says, you're lazy and you need to get back to work, and because of what Moses done. So he's making them suffer, and by making them suffer, he's going to turn them against Moses. And he's trying to drive a wedge between them and Moses to maintain his authority over them. And so he wasn't, this doesn't appear to be an emotional response to me. It appears to be the work of a tyrant and a leader that knows what he's doing, that if he can drive a wedge between the people and Moses and separate them, that Moses and Aaron would go away. He just doesn't know God. The Israelite overseers realized they were in trouble when they were told, you are not to reduce the number of bricks required for each day. They realized they were in trouble, that this couldn't be done, and they didn't know what they were going to do other than get beat more. Verse 20. When they left Pharaoh, they found Moses and Aaron. They found Moses and Aaron waiting to meet them. And they said, may the Lord look on you and judge you. You have made us obnoxious to Pharaoh and his officials, and have put a sword in their hand to kill us. And it's almost like these overseers, almost as if they represent all of the people, would say, "Hey, Moses, we had this comfortable oppression going on. We were pretty comfortable in our slavery, and you're messing it all up, and you're making it difficult." And it's almost like the oppression that they were under, that they had become so comfortable in that it didn't bother them anymore. And it shows what people can get used to. I was reading a book. Viktor Frankl was in the Nazi internment camps in Nazi Germany, and he just speaks of what people were able to get used to in such a dark and oppressive environment. And he talks about the things that the human mind can adjust to, the kind of darkness and the things that they lived in at that time. But it was the little changes. It wasn't so much all the variations that we can get used to as human beings, but it's when change happens within that, change that we don't understand, change that takes us out of that sort of comfortable place that we've grown used to. And so even in a Nazi prison camp, they had grown used to the oppression, to not having shoes, to sleeping 9 men in a bunk made for one, of the lice, and just on and on, being dehumanized and being considered a number and not having a name any longer. And so all that stuff just became normal to them. That didn't even mean anything to them after a while, until things changed, until even a subtle change in their day just rocked their worlds. Like they wanted to go back to their 9 men on a bunk and the lice and their rooms and what they were used to, and they didn't like to be shaken up. And he said even a small thing he speaks of a man breaking a shoestring, and his mind breaks, that he had comfortable in this situation, that every day was the same and comfortable in that oppression, but breaking his shoestring put him over the edge, that suddenly he couldn't tie his shoes. He knew he was going to struggle through the day, and it drove a man over the edge. It's just it's a crazy, amazing thing what our minds can do. It's a very similar thing, I think, right here, is that the oppression, the slavery that they're working on, that they were boxed in, they had become comfortable with that. And when Pharaoh begins to speak of this, working harder and changing their routine, is when they buck up and they said, wait a minute. Previously in chapter 4, as Moses and Aaron talked to the elders, they got excited and they said, this is a great idea. This is good, that God is going to deliver us. And they were all about it. And then the minute that things got difficult, the things got a little heated, and their life changed a little bit, suddenly they become wanting their comfortable oppression back. And it's almost like they said, Moses, that was a great idea, it just didn't work. It's time to drop it. It's time to go back to our comfortable oppression. And if you just stop for a minute and you think about the world we live in today, and the things that are going on, the same type of mentality is going on. And as Christians, we hold to the Bible, we hold fast to the Bible, fast to God's words, and the moral and ethical boundaries that God has set up for life of His creation. And the world would say, you need to let go of that crazy stuff. You need to, and so many Christians think these ideas are great until there's a little bit of pain involved, until taking that stand and holding on to those things becomes difficult. And then suddenly it was like, we just need to drop that. We need to be more progressive and get with the program, and to the point where you start hearing things like, we need to divorce the New Testament from the Old Testament. We need to let some of them Old Testament ideas go. In fact, some just say we need to let the Bible go. It's just old and outdated, and all those things obviously are ridiculous. And and it's really just playing to the dark hearts of men, and really finding a path to be in a comfortable oppression under a Pharaoh of this world, and instead of serving God and God alone, instead of having Him Almighty high and lifted up on the throne of our lives, and being first and foremost, and letting everything else be in its proper place. So let's go on. Verse 22. Moses returned to the Lord and said, "Why, Lord? Why have you brought trouble on this people? Is this why you sent me?" When you hear that, "Why, Lord, why? Is this why you sent me, Lord, to bring this darkness on these people and make their life difficult so that they can be angry with me?" And you wonder, is Moses really upset for the people? Or is he upset because they're angry at him? And you'd have to search yourself if you're in that situation, because sometimes we're more worried about somebody unfriending us on Facebook than doing the right thing. He can't go wrong if he's doing the work of the Lord, and the Lord called him to that. And Moses is still working through that doing the work of the Lord and doing the things that the Lord determined aren't always comfortable. They don't always feel right, and they're certainly not going to meet the approval of mankind around us. And so we've all found ourselves having this prayer, having this conversation with the Lord. "Why, Lord, why? Why have you brought me trouble on these people? Why have you sent me into this situation to have to deal with this? This isn't what I signed up for. This isn't what I thought, and this was going to be." And so this is part of the growth process, as Moses saying, "Why?" The Lord's saying, behind the scenes, saying, "So you can grow, Moses. So you can grow in your trust in me, that you can grow to the knowledge that I am Almighty, that I am not at the mercy of Pharaoh or of a nation or of any of their gods." And so Moses has got to grow first before he can be a leader of these people, and then teach them the same and bring them to the law. And so verse 23, "Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought trouble on this people, and you have not rescued your people at all." Which is Moses making an accusation that Lord, you didn't deliver on what you said. And really, Moses has now been to Pharaoh one time. He said, "Pharaoh, you need to let these people go." And Pharaoh said, "Who's God? I don't think so. No, I'm not going to do it. In fact, I think you're lazy, and I think you're just making excuses, and you're trying to draw the people away from me." And so he makes life more difficult. And Moses walks away and says, "Lord, you didn't hold up your end of the bargain." And again, I think Moses didn't understand that God has a timeline. Someone once described God's timeline as disgustingly perfect, which I find amazing, because that's the way we look at God's timeline many times. Is it always seems perfect in the end, and it seems just disgusting to us as we go through it. We're disgusted with, our flesh becomes disgusted with the way God approaches these things. And then after, we're like, "God, you're awesome. I don't know how you did it. And I never saw it coming. I never saw you doing those things." And so at this point in this Exodus story, we see that Pharaoh is not happy. He's not happy with the people. He's not happy with them threatening his economy by these slaves, threatening to leave to go worship their God. The people are not happy because their workload just got considerably better. The overseers aren't happy because they just got the boogers beat out of them, and they're being whipped and beaten. The overseers are not happy because Pharaoh isn't happy. The overseers being the Egyptians. The slave drivers they're not happy, and because of the same thing. Pharaoh isn't happy, and I suspect that both were probably getting beat to some degree. Moses is not happy Doesn't say Aaron's not happy, but you know that he's not, because because of this response, and because the people are now turned against them and they don't understand it. And so in the middle of all this, what do we see? We see God at work. We see God moving, God doing what God does, and we see all the people involved are angry, are unhappy, and it's, God is shaking. God is shaking things. Man, you look around today and it sort of feels like our world is shaking. It feels like we're being shook and nobody's happy. And as we see, love seems to grow colder. We see churches turning on each other. We see Christians sniping at each other. The politics of sort of going around in this election season, that people are turning on each other. So it seems like nobody is happy, but behind the scenes, God's doing his work. That's what God does. And he shakes us out of our comfort and causes us to look at what's going on and really to figure out what do we trust. And so I think it was Chuck Missler I've heard say in the past that every day in 1,000 ways the Lord asks you, do you trust him? And every day in 1,000 ways we have that opportunity to say, Lord, I trust you. Even when we say, I don't understand, Lord. And maybe our prayer is, Lord, why? Why, oh, why? Please show me why. Teach me, grow me, lead me through this time in my life. I don't understand why, but Lord, I trust you. But Lord, my life is committed to following after you. And so that's chapter 5 in Exodus. It was a great idea, and it just didn't work yet. And so I hope you'll follow through the rest of the story with me as we go verse by verse and see when the great idea does work and God completes and brings to completion this whole story and this event that he said will happen. And so thank you for joining me this day.